All right, welcome to the Daily Fantasy Flex Podcast, the PGA edition. I am your host, Bryan. I am joined, as always, by Colin Davey and Peter Jennings, a.k.a. CSU Ram 88, who has a really nice background of the wilderness out here, living life.
That's a green screen. I choose to believe that's fake. Where our budget for special effects is on way up on this podcast. He's actually in a basement somewhere.
I'm going to the shades too for the podcast. How hilarious is that? I'm gonna rock the shades. So
wow. Love it.
Oh man, like wearing shades.
The sun is just getting so bright.
That's fine.
Love it.
Yeah. I am in beautiful Beaver Creek. You guys can get a good sweet view. Boys golf trip. So super stoked, and been looking at the British Open a ton. That's been a main topic of conversation. So really excited. We obviously had a little lull there with the All-Star break, but baseball's back, and I love the Open. I think this is going to be super fun, and the lock time is really convenient. Colin, you have to light the early lock relative to these other tournaments, right?
I think the if anything, like West Coast maybe has a slight edge because you can actually stay up right before until I don't even have to set an alarm. This just dovetails really nicely into my normal time.
Yeah, so we're obviously here for the British Open. I think we're probably going to skip really any analysis on last week's John Deere. We usually recap, but since we're at a major here, I think we're going to really spend all of our time talking about the British Open or the Open Championship, whatever you want to call it. I think it was probably like the most when I think of majors from last year, 2016, this is probably the one I think of the most because, Stenson and Phil going back and forth. Stenson obviously having an amazing Sunday round, them going really low. So really exciting major that we have here. It is notable that the Open Championship or that the British Open, like the U.S. Open, does rotate courses. So we're going to jump right into that. It is going to be played at the Royal Birkdale Golf Club. This is in Southport, England. It was last played for the British Open in 2008, which is a little problematic because if you know, our player models are course metrics only go back 5 years. So 2008 is longer than 5 years. But we're going to get into all of this, really break down the course here. And for that, I will kick it to Colin. Colin, do you have any data on this course or were you just going off subjective measures here?
So I think you can do I think we can improve on kind of like the very conservative, just like there's nothing in the history. So just everybody go completely blank. I think so. They played this course once in the Open before in 2008. And there are like very few people in today's field who are actually playing it past that last time. But the one time they did play it, it did kind of register as an accuracy course. And I'm willing to give that some weight because it does kind of line up with some subjective understanding of like what usually happens at the British Open. Think of all the classics, like, Carnoustie or St. Andrews. It usually is link style. It usually has like really heavy rough on the edges, narrow fairways that tend to trend toward accuracy. That's how it played out in 2008. So for the time being, I think my approach is going to be putting in an accuracy course for the course as kind of a placeholder here, something comparable, maybe something like Sawgrass, and zero out the course history. So I will go similar course for fit, but erase all history. And I think that's better. I think that improves on doing absolutely nothing. Pete, do you think the accuracy is a pretty good, all else being equal, fit for British Open?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true, and I think we can look at a lot of stats around that. Obviously, driving accuracy is going to be huge. I think you can look at some GIR stats really well, and then obviously there's a ton of bunkers here. So guys who are scrambling, especially out of bunkers, I think are going to be really important as well.
Yeah, for sure. Pete, are you going to look at any – and Colin, I guess I'll ask this to you as well for both of you. We don't have history on this specific course, but, how different are link-style courses? We know that they're similar. The British Open's always played on a link-style course, which is different than a lot of, American PGA courses, narrow fairways, bunkers. You really have to be accurate with your irons and off the tee. So even though we don't have – data, Pete, are you willing to look at how people have done just on link style courses in general as maybe a proxy?
I definitely will be looking at some of that stuff. I think that there's merit you can find there. And without as much course history, obviously, we're going to be looking for some angles to try to find. And I do think that you can get some value out of there. I wouldn't go too heavy on it, though. I think that you want to rely more on how people set up for fantasy scoring. And I think the course fit here is definitely something we can take advantage of. But, yeah, I like that. I like generally favor the European players. And the one thing last year that we had that was a huge edge, it was probably the biggest edge we've ever had in DFS golf, was the weather angle. Yep. And that was a huge, huge thing last year, and that really paid dividends. I'm a big weather guy normally. So that's another thing that I'll be hopefully be able to find depending on how the weather shakes out, obviously.
Yeah, and we're recording this Monday morning, so definitely weather can change. Weather forecast can change. We are going to do a live show as usual, 8 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday, and we will obviously have a very good idea of weather then. So we'll get into that. But I do want to talk about it just a little bit now as maybe a teaser. Colin, it looks like it's pretty nice weather over in England right now at the course, but at least early forecasts does look pretty difficult. It looks like terrain looks to have some heavy wind. And so my question is what does that do for course fit when there's heavy wind? We saw this last year. Does it just throw every metric out the window? I looked at some trends tools stuff, using our tools just a little bit before the pod, and what I found was that if a course is for your accuracy, like driving accuracy, if you put in a filter for wind, guys with bad accuracy don't necessarily do worse or better. It just sort of just evens out the field because it's so random. Is that sort of what you found in looking at wind before?
Yeah, I think a probably more accurate filter would have to be, it gets kind of skewed because you'd want to run that specifically on accuracy courses to see how, the scenario we're probably all imagining there is the windier it is, the more it'll go left to right. And so, if you hit it out of bounds, that's going to be really penalizing. You could even go you could talk yourself in a circle saying oh, well, the wind makes everybody inaccurate, so maybe inaccurate players get a boost because they're on a level playing field. Right. I think it's honestly really tough to try to figure that stuff out. The one approach I hate is doing the wind specialist angle, where you say certain players are better or worse in the wind. I know that's a little bit debatable around here. We've talked about it before, but I have tried to look for predictive wind specialists and found nothing so far. So I don't know. I think you're just better off just going straight just wind makes it tougher in general, and that's all you can reliably predict off of.
Yeah, no, you wrote an article last year. You talked about the randomness fairy. I don't know if you remember that phrase. Exactly.
I remember the randomness fairy. Yep.
Yeah. So pretty much what you just said is that take. Let's say a randomness fairy comes in and takes every fifth shot, moves the ball in a random direction. What does that do for predicting golf? And then you sort of broke that down, and then at the end surprised everyone, said that's essentially what wind is, because it's just so random in its gusts and how it blows. So it's just really hard to predict. There are some sites out there that will show which golfers do better in the wind, but Pete, I'm curious your thought. Are you going to look at players who do better in the wind if it gets windy, or are you just going to maybe look at just boost long-term adjusted round a little more, or how are you going to play this?
Well, I certainly have tried to figure out the wind thing. I really like Ricky this week, which we'll talk about. He's from Oklahoma. I've played that card and played the European card. And I feel like what ends up happening is, oh, my guy's doing well. He's a good wind player. And then I take him again and they do poorly. And yeah, I'm just as lost as I ever was trying to figure it out. I do think in general, one thing you can look for is guys who have lower ball flight. If we do get a lot of wind, that is one thing that I do think, just from playing a lot of golf and watching, I do think that there's probably something there. But like Colin said, finding something that you can definitively say, okay, this really matters with data has been a challenge. So there's a couple things that you can take. But yeah, I think this week I'm really going to put an emphasis on the accuracy. Like I said, I think that the guys who are scrambling well is going to be really important. And I definitely am going to be weighting stuff like recent GIR a little bit more heavily than normal.
Yeah, that makes sense. And again, we're going to get into this a little bit more. We have early forecast, and it does look rainy and windy, and it is going to be a little bit colder than usual. Obviously, for a lot of these tournaments playing in the summer here in the States, it's pretty toasty, but it's supposed to be in about the 60s, get up to the early or the low to mid 70s over in England, so that could be a factor too. But we'll definitely dive into the weather angle pretty hard on Wednesday, so definitely catch our show then. Let's jump into the field and just talk about some of these golfers. Definitely interesting, very loaded field, which means that there are a lot of different ways that you can build lineups. Usually majors have a little bit weaker pricing, and we definitely see that this week. There's a lot of guys that are typically in even the 9K range that are down in the 7 and 6K range this week for the major. So let's start at the top and just talk through some of these top guys, and we'll just give a sort of a broad overview of some guys that we like. And again, we'll touch on a bunch of the stuff on Wednesday and answer your questions. But let's start at the top. Colin, I'll kick to you first. The guys who are at the top here: DJ, Jordan Spieth, Rahm, and McIlroy seem to be like the top four in pricing. They're sort of ahead of the field by quite a bit. They're all above 11K. What are your thoughts on the top? Some of these guys are coming and playing really well. Some of them not so much.
Yeah, this is maybe one of the weirdest majors that I've kind of gone into, like assessing the top of the field, because I understand why everybody's priced here. It's a major, like some more casual bettors are probably going to be picking household names. But I mean, I think we've all been paying attention to some of these, like, top tier names, and not all of them have had the greatest track record. Start with the most expensive guy in the field, Dustin Johnson. We were kind of skittish on him going in because, he hadn't shown a lot recently. Disappointed in the U.S. Open too. Like, I'm not sure he actually is like the odds-on favorite, between the fact that he's just a poor play recently. There's some subjective stuff and some angles in the lead up to Augusta that weren't really resolved, and it's an accuracy course. So he's like pretty far down for me for a 12K guy. Yeah. I think everyone else is kind of on the same page, and I'll keep his ownership down a little bit. But I think the fact that he's still the odds-on favorite will keep his ownership high enough that, like, I just don't see him as a viable play in pretty much any format. The guy that I'm feeling honestly similarly about is Rory McIlroy right now. I know he is a darling among even among the high-stakes players right now. But if you click on if you take a look at his recent history, his last two tournaments, including his own tournament, in Ireland, he's missed the cut on. Yeah. If you peek a little closer, he does have a really low volume of tournaments played, and that's going to skew his sample a lot. Just because, two missed cuts when you don't have a lot of kind of backstop of long-term adjusted round to work with, it's really going to skew your numbers badly. So I'm probably going to be more bearish on most than Rory if we're really weighting those Euro results. Those are some pretty weak field tournaments that he missed the cut in. So I think the only people that are justifying their price in the top tier are Spieth and Rahm, who really is doing it off of a strength off the tournament. He won by something like 6 strokes in the Euro field. Yeah, it's a weaker field, but he beat the crap out of that weaker field. So I think Rahm and Spieth are the only ones that have lived up to their price tag so far. Pete, agree, disagree?
Yeah, I agree with all of it. Short Dustin Johnson, the whole Augusta thing, some weird karma, weird stuff. We've kind of gone into it, but he didn't fall down the stairs. There's some weird stuff that happened there, I think, in his personal life, and he's been awful since. I mean, just hot as can be. 3 wins before that, fallen off a cliff since. Accuracy course, short Dustin Johnson. Rory, in general, has been one of the best fantasy scorers and someone that I like to take. Stopped taking him as he got so popular in the higher stakes, but 2 missed cuts, dealing with an injury that still could be bothering him, people talking about that. And I watched actually a couple of his last holes in the last Euro event, and he needed to make birdie on 18, which is an easy birdie hole. He was with Stenson and Fowler. They both made birdies. And he actually made a pretty good shot to give himself a chance with a birdie putt after missing left with a short, a mid iron. And he had a 6-foot putt. He missed the hole by inches, like a 6-foot putt. It didn't even give it a chance to go in. when he needed it at minimum to make the cut. So I'm off Rory. I think Rahm's my favorite by far. You definitely could see Spieth doing well here. He's kind of been knocking on the door, and obviously has had that incredible bunker finish, which I think a lot of people remember, which will probably boost his ownership. But I do think Spieth is playing really well relative to especially Dustin and Rory. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it. I like the guys a ton below them. I like Sergio. I like Justin Rose. Even getting into the 9K range, I talked about Ricky. I think that's where you want to start your lineups, not with most of these guys personally.
Yeah, so Pete, I was going to ask you, it's a good segue here into the guys a little bit lower. I'm curious what your thoughts are just going to be on ownership for all of these guys, like even 9K and above, because, some of these guys like DJ and Rory specifically are not playing very well. And a lot of these guys in the lower range, I mean, Ricky, Adam Scott is down at, 8.5. Ricky's at 9.2. Sergio is a little more pricey, but these guys I did pull up an article. This is from Colin's boy, Jack Nichols over at 15th Club. He wrote an article just a little bit ago about who sort of raises their performance on link-style courses. So if we're going to go with that narrative, because we don't have course fit, and just maybe look at some guys that do well on links, those guys are better than some of these other guys at the top here at links courses in general, and they're playing well. And you get a discount on them. So I'm curious what your thoughts on ownership are going to be for some of these guys. I mean, we saw that Adam Scott was like really cheap for the U.S. Open, right? And he was just so chalky that it was sort of hard to play him. Well, what are your thoughts on ownership? Do you think it's going to be the same thing where Ricky and Adam Scott's ownership are just going to be so high that it's really hard to use them for GPPs?
Oh yeah, Ricky's going to be heavily owned, but this is where Colin and I will have our interesting little debate. I know that there's going to be a ton of merit. I'm probably going to fade him in a lot of GPPs, but I just feel like his equity is so high relative to his price. But again, it's golf. I'm probably overall wrong in this one, but the blend of chalk and contrarian stuff is still a debate and an art form that hopefully we're getting closer to solving or getting better at. And I do think certain guys have done a really good job of it. But it's going to be a challenge to roster them because I think everyone's having the same thought process. Yeah,
Colin, jump in here. I'm curious your thoughts on the ownership.
Let's go to the uncontroversial one. Yes, I think Ricky's equity is going to be high. There's a great finish that isn't he did well in the Scottish Open. I think he's prepped there, and that's not priced in. The reason that I'm more okay pivoting from him, I think the guy who's going to have comparable equity, and this is kind of a deeper hot take, is Hideki Matsuyama at the same price. I think people are just going to skip him and massively prefer Ricky. And I have Hideki as being one of the top 3 players in the field overall. Because if you look at everyone else's results and what they've put up, just click on his game log, and in the past 20 tournaments, there was 1 missed cuts, a ton of top 10s, great finish at U.S. Open, was at the Irish Open. I put up a comparable number. I think he's right up there in terms of equity with Ricky. If you gave me head-to-head, who would win in a matchup, I think it's close. I might even favor Matsuyama by a little bit. And I think, yeah. And
For ownership, I love that.
You're going to get an enormous amount of leverage just as people are going to prefer Ricky with the savings and think he's a better player. I think using that same equity ownership indifference curve that we're kind of mentally sketching out, I think Matsuyama beats Ricky by a significant margin.
Yeah, I agree with that for ownership reasons. I love Matsuyama. Yeah. I've been a Matsuyama sucker for a long time, and hopefully he can finally get it done in the major. I was kicking myself for not having him in the U.S. Open because, in general, he has been a contrarian pivot. I've played him a ton, especially in these, the higher stakes Thunderdomes. You'll get him sub 10% almost every time, and unless Colin goes crazy, I think with all his touting and love for Matsuyama, I think he'll probably still end up under 10% this week.
Yeah, and Matsuyama does have a pretty good history at link-style courses, so definitely a feather in his cap there. And on that note, another guy right in that same range, Colin and Pete, I both want your thoughts on him because I'm not really sure what to do with him. A guy who is not in this range very often. He finished 4th at the U.S. Open and then has just gone on a run, 6th at the BMW International Open, was over at the Euro Tour Open de France. First place there, Irish Open, 10th place there. Tommy Fleetwood at 9.8, has probably the best recent form of a lot of guys in the field, but definitely not a name we're used to seeing almost at 10K. Pete, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on Fleetwood and what people are going to do with that name at that price?
I mean, I like Fleetwood. The price is high. It's interesting. That's my dad's favorite golfer. He's just been talking about how he's going to take him. He just loves Tommy Fleetwood, and he's going to be all over him for all the speculated. And there he is at 9,800. So unbelievable in the pricing. But yeah, he's been playing great. If you follow him on social media, it's hard not to really like the guy just as a dude's dude, and he's great. So all the subjective and all the fun stuff aside, probably too expensive, considering he's more expensive than Ricky and Matsuyama, just from an equity standpoint. But yeah, I'm curious to see where his ownership falls, given where his price is. Colin, what do you think?
I mean, I think Ricky and Matsuyama are so skewed in terms of I massively prefer both in terms of equity, but if they weren't in the field, I think 9,800 is about a fair price for Fleetwood. Including the stuff that isn't priced in, actually. So, I thought he was priced in high before. I thought he was priced high before the Irish Open, but I think he's priced right about now. He is a good fit. I have him popping as he's definitely got the accuracy thing going in the vein of all Euro players. I was trying to figure out why he was priced so high, and the thing that I do have to look into a little bit more is for a lot of these British players, we haven't talked about the narrative of, or even just Euro players in general. Is there or for the British players especially, is there some sort of home course or home country angle that we haven't considered?
And the Scottish Open angle that we mentioned.
Yeah, the one we didn't talk about is Justin Rose played here in 2008 as a 17-year-old amateur and carded a really good score. I don't know if the homecoming narrative is a legitimate one. If people look into that. I don't know how it'll get touted or if people are going to latch onto that during the week. But I think in a vacuum, sure, I believe there is something for British players, maybe doing a little bit better at the British Open. And that could be a reason why he's priced so high. I don't know what his affiliation is with Royal Birkdale or if there's a specific course angle for Fleetwood or something like that. But, he was priced high in odds, well before that. Maybe people are just giving it too good odds because he just won the French Open. But I don't know. But I could see Fleetwood. It'll depend on what his ownership shakes out and if people are getting it priced out. But I'm really curious on that too.
Yeah, and one thing we mentioned last week that I think Colin brought up was that our friend Jake Nichols, again, did a study in people who were playing at the Scottish Open versus the John Deere have historically got about a stroke bump over guys at the John Deere. So I'm not sure if that's something we can really factor into models. Pete, are you looking at that, or are you just sort of subjectively going to adjust your exposure across lineups to get maybe guys a little more? How are you dealing with that data wise?
Oh yeah, I want the guys who've been in Europe. I want the guys who played the Scottish. No matter what they say, guys coming from the John Deere, they have to get adjusted. It's a big thing. Yeah. Just moving over, obviously a huge time change. And I know these guys are traveling on the nicest jets and all that stuff, but I want the guys who have been out in Europe and, it backs up. And obviously we're going to trust the 15th club data there. So, it's not something we can put in player models, but it's something that I definitely will leverage when doing my research.
Cool. Last guy in this tier before we move down to some of the value guys that you could roster with them. And we're missing a lot of guys. We haven't talked about Jason Day. We haven't talked about some of these other guys. And we're definitely going to get to them in our live show. You can ask questions about any golfer. We'll happily talk about them. But the guy I do want to mention is Henrik Stenson. Obviously won it last year. Really had a tough time earlier in 2017. And isn't exactly crushing right now. But if we do look at his form, last three tournaments, we just look at his accuracy off the tee. The U.S. Open, he had 82% of fairways. He did miss the cut because of some unlucky putting. Two tournaments ago, 75% of fairways, and at the Scottish Open last week, 81% of fairways. So, Colin, what are your thoughts on his recent form? He obviously is a link-style golfer, and I'm just curious, whether his ownership, people are going to own him because he won last year or not own him because he sucked lately.
I don't know. Like I think if anything, like if I had to guess, it'd probably be the ownership goes a little bit lower, just because his prices are. I mean, I think people are coming around to fading the winner last year because it's unconnected and all of that. I mean, I don't know. There's just so much like long-term adjusted around hump to overcome. That stretch of missed cuts is brutal. It's been better for sure, but like the Euro results haven't been like overwhelming to make me think that he's totally all the way back. Like especially at his price, like we already named all the guys who I strongly prefer that are like around the same price range. Like I don't think I can fit him into lineups. Like obviously, if I knew he was going to be something like 2% owned, then yes, it'll be a great play. But like I don't see him getting low enough in ownership that I think he is a compelling, like even like too clever, sneaky good, like anything like that.
Yeah. The only argument against what Colin just said, which I think has a ton of merit, would be that we knew he was injured. He was dealing with that knee. He talked about withdrawing, and there's that stretch of golf where he just played so bad. And based on the results, you'd like to say he was just really hurt. But again, we don't know exactly what's going on. That we have the data that he played really poorly. So it's a challenge. I definitely do like him. I think a little more than Colin does because I do think it sets up well for him. I think he's going to embrace being the past champion pretty well. But I still think the long-term adjusted round, just from an equity standpoint, is a lot to overcome. But I do think the injury was weighing him down.
Very fair. All right, let's jump down a little bit in price here and talk about some of the value guys that we think are going to be chalky to pair with some of these guys that we like up top. And there's quite a few of these guys that are just, it seems to be severely underpriced. Pete, I'll kick it to you. It's really going to be hard to figure out like ownership and what to do with some of these guys because like Brendan Steele is 6'8". Rafa Cabrera-Bello, who smashed last week at the Scottish Open 64 on Sunday, is only 6'7". I mean, the list goes on. I mean, there's just so many guys. Berger, obviously coming from the John Deere, that's not great, but 6'7". We have, there's just so many guys in this like low 7K, even mid 7K, high 6K range that it's going to be hard to get off some of this uber chalk here.
If you're up at the accuracy angle, the European angle, love Francesco Molinari again. He was good for the U.S. Open, 7,300, way too cheap. I think he's a really good play. The mid-tier, the eights, we can talk more about in the live show. I also think someone who's going to end up being really heavily owned, especially with some of the angles, is Paul Casey. I like him a decent bit. But again, it's going to come down to ownership and how much a lot of these guys are touted. But yeah, in the lower range, you mentioned a lot of good names. I really think that Molinari in particular is one of my favorites. In the mid-sevens, I like Bernd Wiesberger as well with the European angle. But yeah, there's a lot of guys that you can go to, and really what it's going to come down to for me in tournaments here is finding the leverage. So I could see a couple guys potentially going under the radar here that might normally be more popular because of where they're priced. But again, it just comes down to how much people are touted and what angles people are talking about for the week. So I'd say right now, off the bat, the guy who stands out the most to me is Molinari. What do you think, Colin?
Yeah, I think Molinari and Casey are going to be the best by far. I like him a lot for this price range. I see Molinari resuming his uber chalk status, though. I think there's just so much easy stuff for everybody to latch on to. Euro golfer, accuracy to links course. I think he's going to be as chalky as they're going to get. Interesting, the other guys that I'm going to be high on for sure. The other one who I could see ascending that status for sure, kind of for the same reasons as Matt Kuchar. He might as well be a Euro golfer for how, just fitting the accuracy style and kind of flying under the radar, and does have a good result that is not priced in just this past week at the Scottish Open. So other guys I like in that one. The most interesting one continues to be Steve Stricker, I think, in my mind. He's playing at the Deere, so you ding him a little bit, but he also played well at the Deere, and yet this is the highest volume that he's played probably in a while at a pretty ripe old age, and has the accuracy to really fit it. There's a lot going on with him that I continue to wonder if he makes a generally good GPP play, but he's popping for sure. The other guy who will fly under a little bit is Bill Haas. I know there's a narrative against that, or maybe it's the opposite of the narrative when you pick, because Haas thrives in weak field tournaments. I don't know if that means he does worse in majors, but definitely doesn't get his edge from distance by any stretch. And didn't play either of the warm-up events, so there's not exactly a whole lot of reason. The only thing we have to go off of is a minorly disappointing result at Greenbrier 2 weeks prior. But I think 6,600 is still awfully cheap for him. And he's the one that I have to think about a lot more to figure out if he's actually good play or if there's some stuff that needs to get adjusted there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
Stricker is an interesting one. I'm just
it's tough.
I played Stricker during the John Deere, which probably ended up being a mistake given how chalky he was, but and obviously it worked out. But he's one of those guys where his great putter does a lot of things extremely well, but the age factor is just hard to overcome. And when you think upside, he definitely doesn't come to mind. But he is playing great, and I can see the argument on both sides for him. I don't like the John Deere. I don't like his age, but he does set up really well for this course in particular.
Yeah, no, he really does. Yeah, I mean, there's so many guys in this lower range. And again, please come ask your questions on the live show about any of these guys. But just look at some guys that could be some pivots. I mean, I think there's 2 big ways to be contrarian in these large GPPs. One is to take a different roster construction approach. We saw that with the U.S. Open. People who just dipped down from the top guys and went in the Brooks Koepka balanced roster angle. Obviously fared very well because Brooks won it, but I don't want to get too results oriented because I think there is another interesting way to build contrarian lineups, which is just really pivoting off the chalk. We did see in that same tournament, Molinari, who was 7K, was 30% owned, and the guys literally just at the same price or within $100, $200 of him were 1% owned. So Colin, I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, it seems like guys in that range, whether it's Fitzpatrick or Wiesberger, who are accuracy guys, can play link style, those guys legitimately might be 2% owned. That's some pretty nice equity for guys who are, pretty talented and really cheap and could just have super low ownership.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, anytime you can get anybody with that equity, that level of equity, under 5% ownership, I think that's great for a long haul. The point we can't emphasize enough here is just if you're playing the Millionaire Maker, how top heavy the prize pool is and where all the equity is. You really got to swing for go big or go home. And that involves, in my mind, I think the game theory optimal play is putting together a lot of lineups that over the long haul will not cash straight up. You got to swing for at the top of the field. That means going really low ownership. I think in terms of other pivots, I think weirdly enough, a lot of these good pivots lie in the people who are playing the John Deere Classic. I've always been more bullish on Daniel Berger than most people, and the results of the Deere continue to back that up. He's on the younger side, so maybe I don't worry about the travel effect as much because he can spring back a little bit. Not necessarily a good fit for this course, but I think consider if you just assume that everybody's going to be flocking to Molinari, I think far fewer people are going to be on Daniel Berger as of now. I think Russell Henley also fits that boat a little bit. Just someone that I'm generally bullish on, not a great fit. But I think his ownership is going to be way depressed compared to some other people. And the other guy kind of in that same vein right now is Bryan Snedeker, who it's normally I'm pretty bearish on him. I don't think he does, great work everywhere, but there is a little bit of surge recently from the U.S. Open and beyond where, I think the big mark on Snedeker was he's dealing with an injury. There was some uncertainty around. If you want to squint at the results and say all right, there's 2 top 25 since last tournaments, it looks like the injury is resolved. I don't know that you could ever hit top 25 with an injury that's actually persistent. But I see him flying under the radar as well, and probably getting some really nice low ownership this week.
Yeah. Pete, is there a chance that some of these guys are a little bit lower owned? I mean, Molinari, he was so chalky at the U.S. Open, and rightfully so, but there's a lot of guys – there's just so many cheap guys that maybe it's distributed. I mean, we have Charles Howell who's playing just about as good as anyone. He's at 6'6". And we have Bryan Harmon, who's maybe even better than Howell lately at 6'6" as well. Wesley Bryan, who played well last week, and you liked maybe
Fade Wesley. Let me just tell you right now, Fade Wesley Bryan, I think.
But even Xander at 6'5", who's coming off a win. But do you think like all of these like guys in great form, obviously way more talented than their price goes, do you think maybe it'll just distribute the ownership evenly among a lot of these guys?
Yeah, it could. I think some guys will still soak up a good bit of it. I like the Burger call a lot. I like him just in general. I like the way he's trending, and I think that he's definitely going to be a world-class golfer. Comes from a super athletic family, obviously, and is an amazing athlete himself. So I like that call. I think Charles Howell, if you go look through his results, I mean, he's one of the all-time money winners out there, but the guy just literally never wins. So it's interesting looking at him. One other name that, I'm a sucker for that I'm curious he could really go under the radar and does fit some of the stuff that we're looking for. Definitely a good course fit. It's Emiliano Grillo. So I do like him as a pivot. Obviously not as much equity as someone like Molinari, but he's certainly interesting. There's a ton of guys that have been, 10K, the high nines. You mentioned Harmon. Kevin Kisner has been really expensive in a lot of these weak fields. We're now getting him at 6,700. You can just kind of go through the list of guys that have been expensive that are now really cheap. I mean, Kyle Stanley, Webb Simpson, all these guys have just been like uber chalk lately because of the field strength. But now they're, in a different field and just way different price.
Yeah, it's a very interesting week for sure. We'll save a little bit of the roster construction stuff for Wednesday's show. But, Colin, I definitely like asking this question, and I'll ask it again on Wednesday, but I at least want to get it now. Just the idea of building your roster around some of the cheap guys. I think I asked you specifically who was the first guy that really has like the best chances of being in single-digit ownership and maybe a guy that you could build around if you want to forego the top guys. At the U.S. Open, you told me Brooks Koepka. So not that I'm asking you to call the winner right now, but like, what do you think that roster construction looks like? I mean, we have Jason Day in the model right now projected for potentially single-digit ownership. Do you think it's that, or do you think it's getting down to some of these 8K guys?
I think Jason Day sounds about right for first you're going to find a single-digit ownership. There's been he's done like absolutely nothing to justify like anything that like to his price tag close. I know we've all been like basically high on him saying this is the week he's finally going to turn it around, but I have him just like plummeting in terms of equity. I know there's a lot of pedigree, and it's kind of tough to remember like the glory days of when Jason Day was just lapping the field, but I think he will be single-digit ownership, but I still don't think like there's enough equity to justify it. Like unless you're getting like super clever. This is kind of like in terms of like who's gonna have single-digit ownership like that has.
Matsuyama, you already made the call, bud.
I think Matsuyama.
I'm in on Matsuyama.
I'm not going to overthink it. That's just the right answer.
Yeah, and I mean, Pete, I guess one thing we should mention is there's a good chance that the weather could just be so brutal on Wednesday night that we throw a lot of this analysis out and we just go all weather it, right?
That's what I'm hoping for, honestly. I mean, I'm hoping for a big weather angle here. I think that you really can play a huge thing. And these majors, obviously the DFS community is getting a lot better at it. But the public has no idea to look at all the weather stuff. So I hope there's a weather angle, and that's what I hope we're riding. But if not, I feel like there's a lot of good names here. I'm really excited for the live show. We'll be able to do some more research. Obviously, we'll have a good gauge of who's being touted. Right now, we're speculating on ownership. We have some idea, but we'll have a much better feel for it on Wednesday. So I'm excited for that. It's a great field, great tournament, and excited to hopefully win $1 million, right? One of us is going to take it down. It's a lock this week.
Oh, yeah, easy lock. Yeah, so again, that live show is going to be at 8 p.m. Eastern time. Please come join us. We'll definitely go through all this. Weather is going to be a very important part of the show, and then we'll talk about how ownerships will definitely affect our roster construction because we will have a really good idea of ownership at that point. Cool. Any last thoughts, Colin, before we jump out of here?
No, I think we're good. So we're going to save all the A material for the live show anyway. So
let's pick some winners right now on Monday, though. Let's do that.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Anyone dying for first pick here?
I'll go first. I'll go Sergio. Let's have him run the table.
go.
Okay, I'll go second. I'll take John Rahm.
All right. I'm gonna go Ricky. He's taking it down.
Okay, what price tag him below for the next one?
Let's go below 8. So we can't do Casey.
Okay.
Even though that just hurt myself. Because I could have taken Casey.
You do have that pick, so go ahead, bud.
All right. Let's see. Under 8. Yeah. I mean, I guess I should go. Okay, Adam Scott would have been a nice one under 9K too. He obviously is chalky. I'm gonna go Leishman. I like Leishman this week.
I love that pick.
Yeah, one of the better link style golfers in the world. So I like that. Pete, back to you.
I'll keep it going with a chalk, and I will go with Molinari. But I was close to taking a couple other guys. So I'm curious, Colin.
Oh no, I'm going deep cuts for the last pick. He's going to, because it's in Europe, he's going to convince himself it's the Ryder Cup in his head. I'm going Patrick
Reed. Oh man.
He's going to be storming over there like Washington crossing the Delaware and just go full Captain America over everybody. I want him to go heel on Sunday and just doing the whole, do the Rory to the crowd. Like, I can't hear you. Just troll everybody. Get really emotive. Like, if that happens, I will actually watch that. God forbid.
That's a great pick, Colin. All right. Sounds good. We'll end it there. Again, live show at 8 p.m. Eastern time. We will definitely have some other people on. We'll tease it at that, but definitely come hang out with us. Then you can just go to the site, FantasyLabs.com, and we'll have a link directing you right to the show. So thanks again for listening. We'll talk to you guys on Wednesday.